How's everyone doing today? Well, I hope it's a great Wednesday. Well, I want to welcome everyone today. I am really glad you're here for today's session on building real accountability. I think whenever people hear the word accountability, they often immediately just think about maybe discipline or micromanagement or difficult conversations. But real accountability to me is actually much bigger than that. At its core, accountability is really creating a culture where expectations are clear, the ownership exists, and everybody knows who owns what, commitments matter, and follow through becomes normalized. And honestly, most accountability problems in organizations are not because people are just lazy or unwilling. Many times, accountability really breaks down because expectations were never really clarified, ownership was never established, and follow through became inconsistent over time. So, today I really want it to be practical. And my goal for you is to leave with some tools, some language to use, and approaches you can immediately use with your team. So I want to start off today with this quote from Sam Silverstein. Accountability is the glue that ties commitment to results. Without it, good intentions never leave the starting line. And I think that this is really powerful because accountability is not really about like the pressure, it's about the commitment. It's that bridge between what we say we're going to do and what actually gets done. Most teams do not struggle because they lack goals. We have goals that we want to achieve, but most teams struggle because commitments become unclear. They're inconsistent or they're unsupported over time. So when accountability is healthy, people are not constantly being chased down because there's clarity, there's ownership, and then there's trust that people will follow through. So I want to start off with like a quick reflection question and kind of get your thoughts on this. Whenever you think about accountability on your team or maybe a team that you've witnessed, what gets in the way of that accountability? And I put some common themes here. So, like fear of commitment, lack of clarity, inconsistent follow through, avoiding hard conversations, maybe different expectations, or lack of ownership. And I want to get your thoughts. What do you feel like gets in the way of accountability on your team or maybe just in general if you don't want to say anything about your team? Lack of ownership, fear of conflict. Yeah. Lack of clarity. So a lot of these things, it's not actually about the performance about of the person. It's really starting with those communication issues, right? Maybe that expectation issues or leadership issues, maybe that consistency, the lack of clarity, the lack of ownership, and also, like it was saying, like Ruth said, the fear of conflict. And that starts with trust too. You want to be able to have these conversations with people on your team, but it does get hard if there's not that trust that was built. Inconsistency and being selective whom to have a conversation. Yes, exactly. So over time, if these issues, if these common themes that we're seeing are not addressed, we can have frustration, right? So I want you to think about this as we're going through and like right now. So how many workplace frustrations could actually be traced back to unclear expectations or inconsistent follow through? How many times have you had a boss maybe that said, "Hey, yeah, I want you to do this task and just keep me updated on it." And then whenever, 2 days later, they're like, "Hey, I thought you were going to keep me updated." Well, you never told me when to keep you updated. there's that lack of clarity there, right? I did not meet their expectations because they didn't tell me explicitly what the expectation actually was, so it was unclear. Maybe they made the assumption that I knew when they were going to ask me about it or when it was going to be due or anything like that. So, I want to talk the difference between responsibility and accountability and ownership. Poor communication causes many problems. Yes. On our team, I'm sure that you've heard this if you've been around Jason on any of the communication. Communication is the illusion that has taken place is a big problem. So we often think that we've communicated it, and then they do something or I do something, whoever, and they're like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "Well, this is what I assumed you meant by this communication." So responsibility is that you were assigned a task. And the focus of this is that you're obligated to do it because you were assigned the task. And then we move over to accountability, which is that you own this topic, this outcome, and the focus is really that ownership. And then we go on to ownership, and you're like, hey, I drive the results and I improve it. The focus is on the impact. So a lot of organizations, they stop at that responsibility because people are completing the assigned task, but high performing cultures move towards this ownership, and ownership is more like identifying problems before being asked to. You're following through consistently. You're communicating proactively, and you're improving processes instead of just simply maintaining them. So this shift changes the culture, right? You're not just responsible for a task, but you're actually owning the task and driving the results, and you're impacting that way. So you really move from the focus of responsibility being that obligation piece to the ownership and being impacting the culture, impacting uh, the processes that you are maybe assigned, but then I'm like, I'm not just being assigned this. I am owning it and I'm going to make it the best that it can be. So, why do you feel like accountability breaks down? What kind of reasons do you feel like in the workplace accountability breaks down? You can put it in the chat or you can come off chat or off mute. I do feel like we do have some themes already breaking in here, like the poor communication, right? The lack of commitment, inconsistency. We've got even that fear, right, Ruth, like you said earlier. And so a lot of the times we have accountability breaking down because we have vague expectations. Sometimes leaders think that they have communicated clearly, but what they really actually communicated was a broad direction rather than a specific expectation. So we have things like, hey, get this to me soon. Keep me updated. Handle this task. And those phrases really leave room for a lot of interpretation, right? We make the assumption that they understand what I'm saying, what you're saying, or you feel like you understood what the leader was telling you, but it's really vague. And then, well, you didn't meet my expectation. You gave me a vague expectation. And then we have second, the avoided conversations. Many leaders really delay this accountability conversation because they want to avoid, sorry, avoid tension or the conflict. Third, there's low trust. People maybe don't feel psychologically safe, so they hide mistakes, they avoid that transparency, or they disengage altogether. Fourth, we have that inconsistent follow through. So if expectations are enforced inconsistently, accountability starts feeling optional, right? So you have to be consistent in that follow-up, in that follow-through. Robert says, perception of task just needs to get done, but no communication explaining why it is important. 100%. I think that happens so many times on teams, especially. Like we feel like we've given the perception that the task, it needs to get done, but when does it need to get done? Who's doing what? All of those important ownership tasks are not said. And then fifth, we have leaders rescuing instead of coaching. So sometimes leaders unintentionally create dependency because they constantly are stepping in too quickly rather than helping people build that ownership. And I talk about this a lot whenever we're talking about multipliers, the book Multipliers. And I've done a webinar on multipliers. And if you want to know more, I'm glad to talk more about that. But unintentionally, we become we are not multiplying their accountability and their ownership, but rather we're making them dependent on us. So accountability really falls in the gaps between expectations and the follow through that we expect, right? So I'm going to go over this accountability framework, this accountability equation, and this was not from any one researcher. It's kind of was put together based off of a few research and psychologists and leaders throughout the world. So the first one is clear expectations. We have clear expectations. So research consistently supports the idea across leadership and organization, well, psychology. You have to have clear expectations. So, for example, we have goal-setting researchers like Edwin Locke and Gary Latham. These are two psychologists who developed the goal-setting theory. And they found that people perform significantly better when expectations are specific and clearly defined. People cannot truly be held accountable to expectations that were never made clear. So think about that. That's the first part of this leadership equation or this accountability equation. And then we have personal growth. This personal growth piece really connects to the work of Carol Dweck and Mary Murphy and the concept of growth mindset. So healthy accountability cultures are not built on punishment. They're built on the belief that people can learn, they can improve, and they can develop over time. So having that personal growth piece of this accountability. And then there's that consistent follow through. So we have researchers like Stephen M. R. Covey, and they talk about how trust is built in that the actions that are consistently aligning with commitments. So accountability really breaks down quickly when follow through becomes inconsistent. They don't know when it's going to be something that they're held accountable for versus when it's just going to be swept under the rug or even forgotten. And then finally, all three of those things results in trust being built. When one piece is missing, accountability breaks down. So let's talk about this. For example, you can have clear expectations without ownership, and people may comply temporarily, but then they're not truly going to truly engage because they're not going to have that personal growth piece and they're not going to have that consistent follow through. You can have ownership without clarity, and people become frustrated because the success is undefined. They're not having those clear expectations. And you can have clarity and ownership, but without follow through, accountability is fading quickly. That the results and all of that. So even Amy Edmondson's research on high-performing teams shows that strong cultures balance trust, psychological safety, and accountability together. So we have strong accountability cultures that are built through that consistency over time. And ultimately, the outcome of accountability is not just the results. Hopefully, it's also building the trust. So I think that this slide is really important because a lot of the times accountability is really associated with a negative reputation, that negative connotation in many workplaces. It's like, hey, if we're going to hold somebody accountable, it's going to be punishment, they're going to be written up, all of those things. And real accountability is not those things. It's not micromanaging. It's not hovering over people, making sure they're getting their things done. It's not blame or shame. It's not that constant checking, the punishment, or perfection. So when accountability becomes those things and it becomes fear-based, people often are avoiding risk. They're stopped to communicate openly, or they focus more on self-protection than collaboration. They're not willing to have that growth mindset and take risk because they know that they're going to be punished or it's going to be associated with blame or shame. Healthy accountability actually creates more trust because expectations become predictable and transparent. The goal is not control whenever it comes to accountability. The goal is always to create that clarity and consistency so that way your team knows what's expected. So accountability is that clarity, ownership, and follow through. So I want to make this practical for a little bit. We're going to talk about accountability and action, these real situations that leaders are dealing with. The first one, we have a deadline keeps slipping. Well, how do you reset the expectation and reestablish ownership? And I would love if you come off mute and say or type it in there. How would you deal with these situations? A second is a high performer creates frustration for the team. How do you address the impact of that without damaging trust with that high performer? And if you don't address it, how do you address the impact and trust with your team? So then you have another situation. You're saying these expectations and they say they understand, but nothing changes. How do you create clarity and follow through on this? Because maybe you're not wanting to have those conversations because the conflict feels really uncomfortable. So like this one, you avoid the conversation because you don't want conflict. How do you lead the conversation anyway? So these are not just theoretical problems, right? These are everyday leadership problems and moments that we're dealing with. And accountability is often less about one big, difficult conversation and more about creating those consistent habits around expectations and follow through. So think about these situations and how would you approach these situations? How would it feel to be on a team where these situations are happening and the leader's not taking care of it? It would be frustrating, right? So I want to talk about 5 practical tools that you can use today, tomorrow, and in the future. So first is a clarity check. We're defining success. We're defining who owns what, the due date, and the support that is needed. Second, we're going to replace assumptions with agreements. We're not just going to assume alignment. We're going to confirm the alignment. We're going to confirm the expectations before you leave that meeting. Accountability language shifts. We're going to focus more on progress and less on blame. We're going to focus on the obstacles that we need to get over together and the solutions and what support is needed. Fourth, we're going to normalize follow-up because follow-up is not micromanagement when expectations were agreed upon. It's not micromanaging to check in on things. And fifth, we're going to build that peer accountability. We're going to hold each other accountable to commitments, not just the leader. And that happens because of the clarity that is made in those meetings. Everybody knows who's responsible for what. Healthy teams don't just rely on the leader for accountability. The team itself supports the standards and the follow through. So it's not just reliant on the team or on the leader. It's reliant on the whole team. And in order to do that, you're going to have to build trust among the team, right? You can't just say, Lane, you didn't show up at whenever you needed to. Uh, you can't do that if the expectation hasn't been clear and we're all holding each other accountable to the same expectation. So whenever we're talking about the accountability language shift, I want you to know that language and how you say it and the facial expressions and the tone all matter more than we sometimes realize. So instead of saying, hey, I need this ASAP, well, that leaves a lot of ambiguity. You need to try saying something like, not what you say, but how you say it. Exactly. So I need this by Thursday at 3 p.m. Instead of saying, hey, just keep me posted on this. Well, make a time for when you're going to check in on it. So let's check in on Wednesday morning. Instead of saying, hey, why isn't this done? Say, hey, can you help me understand what's getting in the way? What obstacles are you facing? What support do you need? Instead of saying something like, hey, you need to communicate better. Like, that's not going to create any defensiveness, is it? Instead, say, what communication expectations need to become clear? It could be on the leader's side, and it could be on the team member's side that is not quite understanding. Remember, we all come from different backgrounds. We have different cultures. We have different countries that we're coming from. We have different generational gaps. So something that's clear to me as a millennial might not be clear to the Gen Z or the boomer, right? So think about that. Or whatever I'm saying, I'm from Texas. Somebody from Florida may not understand what I'm saying because I'm saying it like I grew up and everybody grew up in Texas. So think about that kind of thing too. Clear is kind, 100%. I love that. Unclear is unkind, and it's honestly disrespectful to the people. So be clear, set the expectations, and don't make assumptions that people are understanding what you're saying. So this may be one of the simplest, most effective tools from today. So before you leave a meeting, you need to get clear on 4 things. What does success look like? You all need to be going towards the same goal. And you all need to know and have that clarity around what it looks like, not assumptions for what it looks like. Who owns this? What tasks are going to be owned by the people? If nobody knows who owns this, they're going to leave the meeting and nothing's going to get done because nobody knows who's going to do it, right? When is it due? You have to have a due date on things, or else I know a lot of people, including myself, that will just never do it until it's actually set to be due. And then what support is needed? You need to know what support your team members need, or you need to be able to tell your leader what support is needed. Because what if you don't know? What if you don't have the support? And I'm not talking about the leader's support. I'm talking about what if you're supposed to be creating a presentation, but you've never created a presentation ever? You don't know what you don't know. So leaving a meeting not clear on these things is just not going to be good whenever it comes to that accountability piece. A huge amount of workplace frustrations come from making assumptions. These could be easily built into an agenda template, 100%. So people leave meetings believing that everyone around them interpreted the expectations the exact same way when they often did not. So this simple habit dramatically improves accountability because you're gaining that clarity. So the clarity check. And then I just want to talk about what accountability is built on. Real accountability cultures are built on clarity, ownership, follow through, consistency, and trust. Notice I didn't say anywhere on here that accountability is built on fear, on pressure, on constant oversight. The strongest accountability cultures are usually the ones where expectations are clear enough that people don't need those constant reminders. People understand the goals. They understand what matters, what's expected, and how their work actually impacts the team. So these are the habits that build a culture where accountability becomes the norm. Jeremy, I always ask what they need from me to be successful in whatever has been assigned to them. I love that. I know what I think I said, but what did you hear? Yes, Joseph, exactly. Um, there's a activity called the double clicking. And so you say a word like accountability, and everybody goes around and says the first thing that they think of when they're thinking about accountability. And you'll notice that a lot of the times there's way different answers than what that means to each other. So getting on the same page is what you need to do. So I want to leave you with a few reflection questions, and these will be in the email that I send out. But what is one conversation, expectation, or commitment you need to clarify this week? So think about that. What would improve on your team if accountability became clearer and more consistent? And what is one tool from today you will use immediately? Sometimes culture changes not through these massive initiatives, but through the small, consistent leadership behaviors repeated over time. And as a team, holding each other accountable, right? So real accountability starts with that clarity, the consistency, and courageous leadership. And by the way, you don't have to be in a leader title to be a leader. You can be that on your team in whatever position you are. So as we wrap up today, here are the biggest ideas I want you to leave with. Clear expectations create confidence and alignment. You have to have clarity. Accountability is an act of respect. It's not an act of control. It's not a punishment. And when we own our commitments, we build better trust and better results. Accountability is not about creating fear. It's about creating that reliability. The whole team knows the expectations and they're holding each other accountable. It's not just the leader's responsibility. So I want to thank you all again for being here today. I appreciate the engagement and the time that you spent. As you reflect on today's conversation, I really want to encourage you to think about one practical step that you can take this week to strengthen accountability on your team. Small leadership habits really create those long-term cultural impacts. So I want to thank you again, and please, please, please enter in the where is it? The feedback. And I was hoping that I could put it in here, but I will make sure that everybody has the link if you to the feedback. And our team really would appreciate it if you would fill that out. And so I want to thank you. I hope y'all have a great rest of your Wednesday.